On Easter weekend of 2020, the sudden silence of an elderly woman concerned family, and when a nearby relative travelled over to check in on her, her disappearance would extend to 2. With no explanation and a great deal of worry, the family grouped together to figure out what was going on, and what they discovered would forever haunt their lives. Welcome back to Coffeehouse Crime. My name is Adrian, and today we're looking at the case of Luke Fawcett. Charismatic, young, and a psychologist, Luke was a man who most people would trust from the outset, but behind his mask lay a cold-hearted, delusional killer. Just to let you know, I post solved, unsolved, and strange cases up to twice a week here, so if that sounds like your kind of thing, please consider subscribing to Coffeehouse Crime. So let's get into the thick of it. Pull up a seat, grab a coffee, and sit back. This is the case of Luke Fawcett. Unbeatable weather, jaw-dropping beaches, and a fantastic work-life culture. Of course, I'm talking about Australia. Although on a slight decline in recent years, Australia is still very high on the list when it comes to the world's most favourable countries to immigrate to. And there's good reason for it. With its assortment of modernised cities all positioned in a warm and rewarding climate, an excellent healthcare system, and a vibrant outdoor lifestyle, Australia has most of what people are looking for. One of the downsides, or possible upsides, is the country's remoteness to the rest of the world. In fact, should you live in Western Australia's capital of Perth, you would have to travel 1,300 miles to reach its neighbouring city, Adelaide. But that doesn't stop over 1.4 million residents calling Perth home. And one of those living in the City of Light was Maree Collins. In the year of 2020, Maree was at the very beginning of her golden years. And aged 66, she was on the venerable side of adulthood, looking forward to slowing down into a more peaceful lifestyle. She came from a family of 6 siblings, and next to her brother Wayne Johnson, they were the youngest of the bunch. Maree was a committed Christian who was an active member of a local church community and participated in many church activities. And being the sort of person she is, she always helped anyone in need. She also had a knack for fashion and home life, and worked part-time in a clothing shop nearby. We all grow into adulthood with varying levels of wanderlust. Some of us wish to explore every avenue of the world, where some simply wish to settle. And for Maree, it was very much the latter. By the time she was in her mid-20s, Maree had saved up enough money to afford an apartment in Washington Gardens, located on Leonard Street, southeast of Perth city centre. This wouldn't only be her first home, but her forever home too, as 4 decades later, she still lived here. And I can see why. A top-floor apartment not only near the city, but overlooking it too. 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and impeccable views. She had played the property market well. Maree experienced many moments in these 4 walls. Birthdays, parties, dates, marriage, and sadly, even death. Her husband dying young in the year 2001. And without any children, she remained a one-woman household. Many things changed over the course of Maree's adulthood, but the one thing that did not was her home. And that's probably why she looked after it so carefully. Friends always pointed out how warm, cosy, and welcoming the place was, and in the year 2020, Maree was having more renovations done too. With no husband or children in the picture, she formed a rich social life with family and friends, and of course with such a homely apartment, she loved to host too. Considering her fine age, she was also pretty good with mobile phones and computers, and she'd message her friends pretty much every day. Which is why, on the day before Easter Sunday, it was rather unusual when she suddenly fell silent. Saturday the 11th of April 2020 started like any other weekend for Maree. Waking up in the early morning, she awoke with coffee, before slipping on her shoes and heading over to Swanburn Beach. And shortly after that, she stopped by her sister Helen's home in Mount Claremont, found just west of Perth Centre. Maree returned home shortly after 1 PM. But after making her way through the front door, she realised that she'd forgotten to give Helen a spare key to the main gates of her apartment complex. They too had recently completed renovations, and in the process had changed the locks. Calling the landline, Maree told her sister that she'd give her a key the next time they met. But after that phone call, silence. Only the next morning did family begin to worry. Helen had put ham in the oven, and at around 10 AM she asked Maree if she was available for lunch. But no response. She texted again 20 minutes later. Still no reply. At 11:30, Helen tried to call her sister, but again, there was no answer. Not that she had much time to think after that, as only 2 minutes later, she received a message from her sister. "Hi Helen, apologies for not taking your call. I am feeling quite unwell. God bless and happy Easter." Helen replied with, "Can I call you? We've been worried." In which Maree replied with, "I have lost my voice, unfortunately. As I said, I am quite unwell. Thank you so much for your thoughts." Maree's initial silence was peculiar enough, but what really concerned Helen was the manner in which she was speaking. This didn't sound like Maree at all. Worried for her sister's safety, she decided to call her brother, Wayne. Both he and his 12-year-old son lived only a few streets away from Maree's apartment, so maybe he could check in on her to make sure she's okay. And after texting Maree and not getting anything back, he also became concerned. He sent Helen a message saying, "Just texted Maree, no answer. I'm leaving HJ here and going up now." And then suddenly, nothing. As soon as he reached her apartment, Wayne too was radio silent. Despite her best efforts in contacting Maree and now Wayne, neither of them accepted her phone calls or replied to her text messages. It was as if her top-floor apartment on Leonard Street had suddenly become a void, with all forms of communication in and out now impossible. As the hours ticked by, Helen's concerns manifested into puzzlement and fear. Maree's silence was one hurdle to get the mind around, but Wayne knew Helen was worried. It made no sense for him to suddenly ignore her like this. Making several phone calls throughout the space of 3 hours, she was finally at the end of her wits. Helen may need help getting through the front gate, but she already had a spare key to her sister's apartment, and so, arming herself with her son-in-law, she drove over to Leonard Street. Meeting Maree's neighbour at the gate, the trio realised that both Helen's and Wayne's cars were on the property. This wasn't good news. They made their way to the 8th floor, all curious to see what was happening behind number 35. Approaching the front door, silence hung heavy in the air, and not one single sound could be heard from the apartment. Maree had lived here for over 40 years, so why did the place suddenly feel so unwelcoming? The familiar sound of metal pushed into the lock. She turned the key before hearing a gentle click from the door. And slowly, Helen pushed it open. But before she could even set one foot into her sister's apartment, her son-in-law and neighbour pulled her back. Peering in from the doorway, they could see a large tarpaulin sheet wrapped in yellow rope, and behind it was the body of Wayne Johnson. They closed the door, ran downstairs, and called the police. The sudden discovery was shocking, sickening, and simply hard to take in. Although their silence now made sense, nothing else did. Unfortunately, it was obvious that these two were murdered, but who in their right mind would do such a thing? Both Maree and Wayne were well loved in their communities. Police were very quick to arrive to the scene, and after walking into the apartment, they were able to confirm that both Maree and Wayne had been subjected to a very violent situation. It's clear that a struggle had ensued throughout the property. Furniture was broken, items scattered across the floor. Lemonade bottles and beer cans were discarded in multiple rooms, and blood was found throughout the apartment. Among the carnage was a used taser, a bread knife, a large hunting knife, and a letter opener. Maree had suffered 24 stab wounds, and Wayne had suffered 25, along with an additional 10 other sharp force injuries, and whoever was responsible for this was no longer in the area. Detectives were quick to begin their investigations, but where do you begin with a crime scene like this? There were no signs of forced entry, and being the penthouse to an 8th-floor apartment, it's rather unlikely that the killer entered through the windows. So there were two options: either the killer had a spare key, or Maree trusted them enough to allow them into the property, and with newly fitted locks, the former didn't seem likely. Investigating the background and whereabouts of Maree's family and friends were going to take some time, but at least for now, detectives could make progress with those in close proximity. But amongst the shocked neighbours and fruitless findings, they managed to find one rather alarming clue. While recording all license plates in the building's car park, officers took the opportunity to peer through the windows on the off chance it provided any valuable information. And on the dashboard of one of these vehicles was a receipt from a local Bunnings hardware store. Transacted at 6:43 PM on Saturday the 11th of April, these items had been purchased only one night prior from a Bunnings warehouse in Belmont. And the items: blue tarpaulin and yellow rope. Police were quick to run the car's plates through West Australia's licence database, and soon after, they found that the car belonged to a resident living here in Washington Gardens. As a matter of fact, he was Maree's next-door neighbour. The name was Luke Fawcett, and 27 years old at the time, he was renting a one-bedroom flat across the hall from Maree. A quick dig through his police records didn't highlight anything significant. A few driving offences, and 2 minor convictions of possession of prohibited drugs, but he had no violent history, and arguably, he was just a young, reckless kid. With divorced parents, his mum entirely out of the picture, and barely any friends while growing up, he didn't have the best childhood. But he made it work. From the outside, Luke was a successful and welcoming individual. Finishing high school at the top of his class, he moved on to study psychology at the University of Western Australia. He worked part-time at a nightclub to get him through his degree, and after graduating, he moved on to become a disability support worker before becoming a psychologist in the mental health field. Moving in with his girlfriend in 2016, Luke had been Maree's neighbour for the last 4 years. Luke and Maree had a normal, neighbourly relationship. Not necessarily friends, but always there for each other. And he'd been to her apartment several times before, helping her move furniture, reconnect her printer, and change her Facebook password. At this point in his life, and excluding a few minor offences, Luke was a respectable young man who had climbed the ranks to become a psychologist. And with a degree so attuned to mental health, he was one that many people looked towards with trust and respect. But as the year 2020 began, several bad things happened, and I'm not talking about coronavirus. To begin with, Luke was diagnosed with both anxiety and depression. He started regularly experiencing panic attacks, and he found no motivation in his work. And next, but he actually quit his job, which under normal circumstances would be fair enough, but the reasoning behind this was slimy. Luke had falsely accused one of his colleagues with sexual misconduct, and when these allegations were proven to be lies, the board took this very seriously. His provisional registration as a psychologist was therefore revoked. Things didn't get better after that. By March, his girlfriend had left him, leaving Luke absolutely devastated. He started to drink alcohol and smoke weed daily. With a failed job, tarnished reputation, failed relationship, and crumbling mental health, shit really had hit the fan for Luke Fawcett. With no money or partner to lean on, he was also facing eviction from his apartment. And after this, he began a worryingly dangerous cocktail of excessive alcohol, cannabis, and antidepressants. As officers began to look into Luke and the newly found receipt, they learned that on this very day he'd checked himself into a local hospital. And these injuries were for multiple lacerations and a dislocated shoulder. Surveillance footage showed him arriving shortly after 3 PM, so officers decided to pay him a little visit. He explained that his injuries were from falling down the stairs while holding a steak knife. Nevertheless, he agreed to provide officers with the DNA sample. Detectives were already hard at work with the receipt, and it didn't take them long to find what they were looking for. At 6:43 PM on Saturday the 11th of April, the evening of Maree's disappearance, a surveillance camera at the local Bunnings warehouse captured Luke Fawcett nonchalantly walking into the store before buying, you guessed it, yellow rope and blue tarpaulin. He cautiously walked out afterward. A neighbour had also come forward to highlight that earlier that day, she'd noticed a stranger acting suspicious outside of her apartment. He was pacing up and down, crying. Feeling skeptical, the neighbour took a picture, and this stranger was Luke. And regretfully, after DNA samples were collected at the crime scene and compared, those retrieved samples were found to match the DNA of Luke Fawcett. His blood was found all over the apartment, mixed in with the blood of Maree and Wayne. Unfortunate to Luke, but this new evidence was a no-brainer to officers. By the time this evidence surfaced, Luke had way too many connections to the crime scene, and on the 13th of April 2020, he was officially arrested for the murder of Maree Collins and Wayne Johnson. With the man now in custody, officers had legal authority to enter his home and his car, and what they found inside was both overwhelming and disturbing. It turns out that Luke had been planning Maree's murder for quite some time. In the month prior, he had bought himself 2 tasers and a pair of handcuffs. And although this next piece of evidence isn't available to the public, I wish it was. But on March the 29th, he recorded himself threatening the camera with a taser and knife, while wearing a tight-fitting latex suit. These threats were to severely hurt or kill this person if they didn't provide their bank details. In this video he said, "We can do this the easy way or the hard way. If it's the hard way, you will be severely hurt, and if you keep pushing me, eventually I will kill you." Police would also find notes in Luke's car. One detailing a checklist which included quiet shoes, a baseball bat, and cable ties. The second list was named interrogation, and included pepper spray to the eyes and potential locations. Luke claimed that the video was part of a home invasion roleplay for a couple online, and the to-do lists were for a video game. Sure. Records show that on the 4th of April he purchased a shovel, and data forensics indicate that he travelled 200 miles to East Kirrup the very next day, where he then dug a shallow grave in preparation. They also found a shovel and a duffel bag nearby. On April the 6th, Luke was spotted in Bunnings' warehouse purchasing tarpaulin, tape, and rope, and 5 days later, it was time. In the afternoon of Saturday the 11th of April, Luke Fawcett entered Maree's flat through trusted means, and once inside, he tased her before stabbing her over 20 times. Once she was dead, he used her apartment as if it were his own. He showered, drank smoothies and beer, and sent flirty messages to a woman he'd started talking to, boasting that he'd just purchased a penthouse apartment. While attempting to cover up the body, Luke realised he needed more rope and tarp. He returned to Bunnings late that evening, resulting in the receipt found by officers. Drinking more beer and smoothies, he then spent the night trying to access her bank accounts. In the early morning, he recorded Perth's skyline from her bedroom window, and when Helen messaged Maree's mobile phone, he sent her emails through Maree's computer. Luke was rather surprised to see Wayne come through the front door. A vicious fight ensued, and although he was able to fracture Luke's collarbone, dislocate his shoulder and stab him 4 times, the attack tragically ended in Wayne's death, leaving the apartment in even more disarray. By 2:30 PM, Luke had called his grandmother to ask for a lift to the hospital, and while waiting for her to arrive, a suspicious neighbour captured this photo. While being treated, he continued to flirt with his new crush. He sent her text messages, calling himself the sexiest patient ever, and sending cringy shit like, "I wish you were here to kiss my boo-boo better." With the overwhelming amount of digital and forensic evidence, Luke would have been wise to plead guilty. Alas, he claimed he was innocent. According to him, he walked into Maree's apartment to find her dead on the floor, and when Wayne arrived, he thought that Luke had killed his sister. Luke did admit to killing Wayne, but only in self-defense after he attacked him. Needless to say, no one was impressed with his story, and in September of 2021, Luke was officially found guilty for the murder of Maree Collins and guilty for the murder of Wayne Johnson. As a result, he was imposed 2 life sentences, with a minimum of 34 years before he is eligible for parole. Prosecutor Justin Whaley expressed that Luke showed callous indifference of the highest order, and a level of depravity that defies adequate description. In a statement, Helen, who had lost her sister and brother in the process, said, "The empty seats at our table will always be constant reminders of the absence at family gatherings, as a son has lost his dad, and I, with our siblings, have lost our youngest sister and brother." Luke Fawcett will be 61 years old before he is even considered for release. A very messed up and senseless story. I think this case hits harder knowing Luke was a psychologist. For someone you trust your own mental health with, he certainly didn't have his own. The motive for why he killed Maree is still to this day not known either. He still denies their murders and pleads his innocence. The best we can guess is he had some form of sick fantasy that he wanted to play out, and never really thought of the consequences that would follow afterward. I do really hope that Maree and Wayne's family will find their strength and recover over time. Thank you so much for watching another video today by Coffeehouse Crime. If you found this video interesting or you learned something new today, then please remember to like the video and subscribe if you haven't yet. And thank you to Andrew from Perth, Australia for suggesting this case. As soon as I started reading the court documents, I was hooked. As always, please share your thoughts in the comments section down below, and I'll see you again real soon in the next video. But until that moment arrives, and especially right now, look after each other. Goodbye.